Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now what I've got whizzing around in front of me today, this is one of the champions from the Orlock gang box for Necromunda, but I've got a different plan in mind for him. This fella's going to be standing in for the Workers' Union leader for Grimdark Future Firefight, which has a Gang Wars expansion. Now, I'm going to make sure to link to all of this down in the description so you can go check these out. If you've never come across one-page rule stuff before, I do thoroughly recommend go have a look, because cheap is free to give it a shot, and the paid expansions, as it were, are, they're beer money, they're pocket change, and they're really, really good. Now, at the moment, they don't actually have an official line of miniatures for their Gangs of New Eden, and with all the love in the world, I can smell when Necromunda's had the, the numbers filed off, but the game itself is still definitely worth checking out. So because there's new Necromunda on the horizon, and I kind of want to get some games in beforehand, even if they're a completely different system, I figured let's paint some totally not Orlock guys for that gang. And I always start with the boss. So all of the paints for this one will be listed in the description below. Same as always, let's get started. So once your miniature is assembled, the first thing to do, of course, is to prime them. And what I've got here is Raven Black that I've primed this fella with. Now I'm using this instead of a true black. You'll see this is just a little bit gray. It's a very dark gray. Because when we shade this or similar, it's a little bit easier to have more to do to go pure black into the recesses and things like that. And it still scans as a black at table distance. It's just a little bit more visual interesting. You can, of course, use a pure black if you want to. It's not going to make that much of a difference, but that's why I've used this. Now, first things first, in order to lay down kind of the leather effect for most of the miniature, what I've got is an old flat brush and some Thunderous blue. And what we're going to do is use this as a quick dry brush over most of the miniature, particularly paying attention to where the edges of things like his jacket and what have you are. Anywhere that we can reach in the back of his trousers and his boots. Just a little bit of blue here is going to help sell that leathery look later on. Now don't worry if you end up getting it over things like his power claw, all these sorts of things, because we of course are going to paint those a different color as we go on. So you may end up with a couple of spots where it looks like there is a little too much, but honestly, keep the faith. You can come back with a little bit of something like Corvus Black or another just off black color to paint over those bits, but I don't think you're going to need to. Hold on to it, and as you apply a wash over the top, you're going to see that come together. Now, there is a tendency to look at miniatures like this and think, oh gosh, there's a lot of detail, this is going to be difficult, but it's really not. We're going to start from the bottom layers, same as getting dressed, and work our way up. So that's going to start with his skin, and I have here Moonstone skin. And this, you can just go straight over the top of his beard, goggles, all that sort of stuff. It's just important that you get his skin first of all. Now this will probably take a second coat because obviously a very bright color like this, they tend not to cover terribly well over black. You can see that's still doing a pretty good job of that. All the same, once this is dried, I will come back and give him a second coat. And with you guys who are wearing gloves, don't forget, paint in those little fingies while you got the chance. Now, moving up from his skin, the next step is going to be his shirt and obviously his sleeves. Some guys are going to have 2 sleeves. This fella doesn't. Now, I was agonizing about whether or not I was going to try and push the boat out and come up with a crazy scheme, or if I'm going to stick closer to the workshop-styled look for them. And honestly, I really like the blue. So I'm going back to Thunderous blue. And you'll see the chains and what have you that are on his chest. I'm just going to go straight over them. But this will cover very, very well. You can pick any color you like here. I was thinking maybe a green for a while, but I like the blue. So anywhere that I need to, I can tidy up with a little bit of black later on. But I think I should be pretty safe with this. Now with Grey Castle, what I'm going to do is paint in the little tabard thing he's got going on. Now as much as possible, you want to try and keep your brush moving in the same direction when you're painting something long and relatively flat like this. Don't worry too much if you do have to flip them upside down and approach from a different angle, but brush moving mostly the same direction will give you a much smoother finish. I'm also going to go up here and paint in that little white collar at the same time. You'll see I've also hit the plasma coils on the pistol with that as well. Now, they're going to be white later, but by adding a lighter color now, it's going to be a little bit easier to pop white over our black primer. What I'm going to switch to now, this is Bleached Strap Grey, which, as well as being super hard to say clearly on camera, is from the Deutsch Afrika Korps historical set. Now, it is a slightly different black, so don't feel as though you need to go rushing out to pick up this one specifically. You could add just a tiny dot of that grey castle into black. I'm using this because I want a little bit of variety between my clothing and the leather straps that I'm painting. So, see under the chain here, it's got a slightly brownish finish to it, as opposed to the bluey sort of colour that we've been using so far. So, over leather straps here, away we go with this. Now that's going to be barely noticeable on camera, but I will know in reality, so that's why I've done it. You could use another color, maybe even a brown or something, but it's up to you. What I have now is gunmetal, and we're going to go over, well, I'll let you guess. I'm going to use a relatively large brush for quite a few of these bits, because I want to go over them relatively quickly. Just a quick blap like this. And when it comes to smaller things like chains and little smaller details on them, I'm going to swap to a smaller brush. But for the most part, as long as this holds a tip, I should be able to base coat most of the metal with this. Now there is quite a bit of that. I've also used it to lay down the base coat on the base. You can do all sorts of awesome stuff with the bases, but I'm angling for finished here. Now what I'm going to do is turn here to Demonic Yellow, and I want to thin this down a little bit because that's probably a bit thick on my brush. And what I'm going to do here is lay down the base coat for any hazard stripe areas. Now on this fella, I'm going to pop this sort of shoulder pad section of Hare's Claw with a few hazard stripes, but I don't want to do, I don't want to sort of overbalance him on one side, because the knee pad would be another really good spot for this if you're painting, your regular gangers or what have you. But instead, I'm just going to concentrate on this one spot. Now that might take 3 or 4 coats, but it is a tiny wee spot. Just make sure that you're keeping your paint nice and thin, and you're letting each layer dry before going on to the next. Now, what I have for his hair, this is Ruddy Terror from the John Blanche range. You can pick any colour you like here. This one works quite well for strawberry blonde types. Okay, so now with some white, I'm going to come back in and paint those plasma coils. They'll probably still need 2 coats to be nice and solid white, but it's going to be much easier over that grey castle. Then with some matte black, we've got 2 things to do. First, of course, there's going to be any hazard stripes that you want. Now I would suggest here, don't worry too much if they're not perfect. We're not painting to win awards here, we're just looking to get some paint on a miniature. So that'll do. A little bit further there. And a third one. And I'm also going to paint in the casing on the plasma pistol with this. You can just paint in the entire weapon as metallic, but I think this looks a little bit more interesting. Now, once you've gone ahead and done any little bits of cleanup that you need to, we can go ahead and apply a wash to them. Now, I've diverted a little bit from my usual here, and instead of using something like Strong Tone or similar, I'm instead turning here to Vallejo Game Color. This is Umber Wash. Now, the reason why I'm using this is that it dries slightly differently to most other wash brands that I've used. What will happen here is this settles a little more like a very thinned down acrylic paint rather than a wash. So if I apply this over black, where it settles, you're actually going to see it a little bit more. Versus if I were to use Strong Tone or something, what happens is that the Strong Tone will practically disappear on the black, though it will still give me the shading and everything I want on the other colors. But here I want this over everything. The one thing I'm going to dodge will be, of course, the white on the plasma pistol. I don't need that. But I do want to go over the black because a little bit of this settling on the black stuff will give us a very cool finish. So, see, I'm not applying huge amounts at a time. I want to be relatively careful with it, but it is going to go over everything. So, once I've done this, pop them in the sun somewhere, give them about half an hour to dry, and let's see what we have then. Now, once that's dried, isn't that magic? You want to work relatively quickly with it because, like contrast paints and similar, if you apply it on his arm, finish the arm first before moving on. Because if you gloop this stuff on, then come back later to fiddle with it, it's going to sort of peel off a skin that it's been making while it's been drying. So it can be a little bit tricky the first couple of times you apply it, but I thoroughly recommend a bottle of that stuff. It is just wonderful. And you see, it has colored even the shadows on that black a little bit. It's got a nice caked in dusty appearance, which is just perfect. Anyhow, we're going to move on. And I have here, this is Rust Tone from Army Painter. What I'm going to do is apply this directly over some of the panels of the armor because I want to change up the color a little bit. And this is a very quick way of doing it. Now you can also use, like I'm using Rust because I like the slightly oily finish that this will give us. But you could also use sepia, anything really, it's up to you. I'm going to use this almost like a framing mechanism. So a little bit of this here on this knee pad, and I will pop some of it into the recesses here as well on the claw, because as well as changing up the color of flat areas, funnily enough, it works really well as a rusty sort of middle bit. Now, more really than for rust, I like the sort of oily appearance it gives in joints and what have you, so I've used it there as well. Really nice stuff. Now what I'm going to turn to, this is probably one of my favorite paints. This is Radiation Glow, and wow, you'll see why it's called that. This is one of the funky glow effect paints from the Army Painter, and I'm just going to carefully blob that in onto the plasma pistol. Yeah, this stuff, it is eye-searingly bright in person. It's my favorite color for plasma guns. You could use a blue one. What's that called? Data system or something it's called? The blue one? But I like orange because that is magnificent. Now for some slightly more mundane highlights, I have Barbarian Flesh, and this is going to go over most of his skin, leaving just a little bit of our shaded stuff in the recesses. If you want to, though, what you can do is just his cheekbones, his brow and what have you, and it will look fine. You don't have to go overboard at this stage if you don't want to. And to highlight his hair, I've just mixed a little bit of white into that ruddy terror from earlier, and I'll just stick it along the edges of his tash, his hair and what have you, that little goatee there as well. Now this stage is purely optional, but if you want to go back to the Thunderous blue from earlier, what you can do is brighten up some of his clothes by going over most of the flat areas and leaving your grimy shaded stuff in the recesses. This one, like I said, easy enough to skip because when we highlight this, some of this is going to practically disappear, so don't worry too much about this step. I'm just being fussy. What I will use there is a little Stratos blue for the actual highlights. And if you've got Wolf Grey, you could use that instead. Just thin it down a little bit more than you usually would, because it will go quite bright on. So take your time with it if you need to. Now for those not quite white bits, what I have now is Great Hall Grey. And I'm going to paint over the tabard and his collar with this. Quite a common question is folks will ask, oh, do I need all of these colors? And the short answer is no. If you're content to mix a little, you could put some white into your base coat or a little bit of ivory here and there and experiment with mixing up your own highlight colors. The reason why I tend to go for bottled solutions is that it's easier, and folks generally quite like having a one bottle problem solver. But never feel as though you've got to pick up every single paint in one of these guys, because a lot of them, particularly your highlights, you can mix. So experiment with that sometime. Don't be afraid to give it a shot. Now what I've mixed up here is 1 drop of fresh rust, which is one of the effects paints from the Armor Painter, and 5 drops of water. Although it can be fixer, it can be pretty much anything you fancy, but thinning this down quite a bit is going to be better than applying it neat, because man, this stuff, it goes pretty intense if you don't thin it down. So what I'm going to do is paint this into some of the areas where I want actual rust to have collected. You can go pretty overboard with this quite quickly, so try not to overdo it, particularly on weapons and things like that. However, it will look cool, so it is your choice how much of this you apply. It's going to look quite orange first going on, but as it dries, it'll dull down a fair bit and look a lot more reasonable. Now I've also got here some of the verdigris effect. I'm not going to use very much of this, but the same principle applies. About 1 drop of this to 5 or so drops of water, and you do not want to use much of this at all. So just a couple of drops here and there to sell some of the base. Now to finish him off, there are a couple of things just to do before we get to highlighting the metal. What I've done is to black the base rim because I now want to varnish this guy with a matte varnish. If I go ahead and I highlight the metalwork and then matte varnish him, it's going to spoil some of that shine. Whereas if I varnish him first, he's already quite matte, but I do want to seal all of my work, then I go ahead and pop in with the nice shiny silver stuff. It's going to look much nicer. So I'm going to take him outside, hit him with a spray. Then once everything is matted down, what I've got is some plate mail metal. Thin this down a little bit more than you normally would. And we'll just use this to ding up some of the edges of the metal bits. Now, this will be a little bit easier on things like the chains and the like. But yeah, this is really it. You don't want to necessarily paint a bright highlight along all of the metal stuff. Just little dribs and drabs to give it that rough appearance. So along the top here, I'm not going to highlight the whole, what do you call them? These little ridged bits. I'm just going to dot in few little corners, and same too with his fist, his skulls, just little bits to help sell the look. Now once I'm finished with this, what I'm going to do is grab some gloss varnish and just pop a little tiny bit of that over the plasma coils, and then I'll call them done. So once I'm finished with all that, let's get him up on the spinny thing and have a look at him once he is all finished. And so there at last, our Orlock-styled worker union leader is complete. Now, obviously this fella is geared up so that I can use him in Necromunda as well, but in the interim, I'm quite looking forward to getting in a few games of the Grimdark Future Firefight. Really recommend going and checking it out. Price of admission is next to nothing, and on top of that, any updates afterwards are free, so can't beat that. I do wish I'd had a little bit more bravery and push the boat out a bit with the color scheme, but I do like the blue, so why not? Anyhow, as always, thanks goes out to Exit23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, which includes my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Thank you very much for your support, folks. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.